The obsidian blade pressed against my throat drew blood. Warm, real mine. 3 hunters circled me in the firelit cave, their eyes reflecting something between fear and hunger. They thought I was weak, vulnerable, a chief's son who'd lost his way. They didn't know about the warehouse, the impossible space that had awakened in my mind when I arrived in this body, filled with weapons these primitives couldn't even imagine. My fingers closed around cold steel that materialized in my palm. The handgun's weight felt right, felt real. "Back away," I said quietly. They laughed. The gunshot echoed through the valley like thunder from an angry god. "I won't just survive, I'll build an empire." But first, these 3 needed to learn what modern warfare really means. This story is powered by Butterfly Stories on Patreon, where we continue the stories you love. Want more? Link in the description. That moment hadn't happened yet. I jolted awake mid-sprint, my legs pumping through knee-deep snow that burned like acid against my bare skin. My lungs screamed. My heart hammered against ribs that felt too thin, too weak. Mammoth trumpets split the frozen air, deep, furious bellows that vibrated through my chest, and human screams answered them. I wasn't running. This body was running. I was just along for the ride. A massive shape charged through the swirling snow to my left. Tusks like curved swords, eyes red with rage. 12 hunters scattered across the tundra like ants fleeing a boot, their obsidian-tipped spears bouncing uselessly off hide thick. As armor plating, my military historian's mind cataloged the disaster instantly. No formation, no coordination, no fallback position. These men were dying because they'd never learned basic tactical retreat. "Radhar, move!" someone screamed. Too late. The mammoth's tusk caught a young hunter square in the chest, punching through fur and flesh like paper. Rother's body flew 15 feet and landed 3 feet from where I stumbled. His eyes were already empty. Blood steamed on the snow. I'd studied ancient hunting strategies. Read accounts of mammoth kills that required coordinated efforts, pit traps, fire lines. This wasn't a hunt. This was a slaughter. "The tree line!" I screamed, my voice cracking in a throat that didn't feel like mine. "Everyone fall back to the tree line. Use the pines as cover." Heads turned. Warriors hesitated, their faces twisted with confusion. Who was this giving orders? A distant bellow cut through the chaos, deeper than the mammoth's rage, heavy with authority. "Do as my son commands. The trees. Now, Chief Vornak." My father. The words felt alien in my mind, but my body responded to that voice with bone-deep recognition. We ran. 8 of us reached the dense pine forest. For didn't. I watched Grin the tall vanish under churning legs. Saw Mikas try to plant his spear and get swatted aside like a child's toy. The mammoth didn't follow us into the trees. Couldn't fit its bulk between the ancient trunks. We'd survived. Barely. The recovery fire crackled in a shallow cave 2 hours later, its warmth doing nothing for the cold settling in my gut. 8 hunters sat in exhausted silence. The chief's massive silhouette blocked the cave mouth. As he approached me, Vornak the Scarred earned his name honestly. Half his face looked like melted candle wax, the flesh twisted and shiny in the firelight. One eye gone milky white, but the other eye, dark and sharp, fixed on me with an intensity that made my stolen body want to flee. "You gave commands." His voice rumbled like stones grinding together. Spirit touched commands. Words my son never learned. I understood every guttural syllable perfectly. "How?" My hands moved to my chest, finding raised scars beneath the rough furs. Ritual marks. Failed hunts, my new memories whispered. Durgan Thornson had been considered weak. A disappointment. The death vision showed me, I said. The lie came easily. When a mammoth charged, I saw the pattern, saw how he needed to move. Vornak's scarred face gave nothing away, but his milky, I studied me with new suspicion, something calculating behind the damaged flesh. Movement at the fire's edge. An elderly man rose from the shadows, his hollow cheeks painted with red ochre, his fingers stained black from sacred herbs. Mogren the shaman circled me like a vulture examining carrion. The boy's soul has been replaced. Mogren's voice dripped with certainty. A cave demon wears his flesh. I smell the wrongness on him. My blood went cold. In this world, that accusation meant exile. Death. He speaks madness, I started, but Mogren cut me off. Ritual exile. The spirits demand it. We must silence. Vornak's single word fell like a hammer. The shaman's mouth snapped shut, but his red-rimmed eyes promised this wasn't over. My son lives. He commanded wisely. We will speak no more of demons tonight. The chief turned and walked back to the fire, dismissing us both. But I'd seen the look that passed between them, the silent communication of men who'd ruled this tribe together for decades. Vornak wasn't convinced of my innocence. He was simply waiting. The tribe slept in exhausted piles around the dying fire. I sat apart, my back against cold stone, examining my hands by the ember light. Scarred, calloused, alien. These hands had never held a rifle, never assembled a weapon, never pulled a trigger. But the mind behind them had studied every war in human history, every advance in military technology, every tactical evolution from bronze swords to nuclear warheads. I was Durgan Thorn's son now, a chief's disappointing son, a failure reborn. And everyone in this cave believed I was possessed by a demon. In this world, that belief was a death sentence. I woke before dawn and slipped out of the cave, while the tribe still snored. My body needed testing. I sprinted across the frozen tundra until my lungs burned, then kept going, 2 miles before my legs gave out. Not bad for a frame that looked half-starved. I climbed the rocky outcropping near our territory marker, fingers finding holds my modern mind wouldn't have trusted. This body knew stone the way I'd known concrete. But when I tried to throw a crude obsidian blade at a pine trunk, it wobbled end over end and skittered off bark. 3 more attempts. Same result. The knife-throwing techniques I'd learned from YouTube videos and military manuals were useless with unbalanced prehistoric tools. The weight distribution was wrong. The grip was wrong. Everything was wrong. I needed better weapons. So I went to get them. The tribe's tool cache sat in a shallow alcove near the main cave. Obsidian cores, antler hammers, leather strips, unfinished spear shafts. I sorted through everything, while the first hunters stumbled out to piss in the snow. What I found made my stomach drop. The spear bindings used loose overhand knots that would slip under pressure. The obsidian blades were percussion-flaked with no pressure refinement, serviceable for skinning, but too thick for clean penetration. Nobody had figured out that angling your strikes created longer, sharper edges. These people had survived for generations with tools that belonged in a museum's early human exhibit. The demon plays with rocks now. Mogren's voice came from behind me. The shaman stood wrapped in his fur cloak, red-rimmed eyes watching my hands. I'm checking our weapons, I said. We'll need them sharp if Bloodfawn comes. Sharp enough to kill 3 hunters? His lips curled. The spirits whisper strange truths about you, Durgan. Truths that smell like ash and iron. He drifted away before I could respond. The threat was clear. I had to give the tribe a reason to keep me alive. By mid-morning, I'd gathered an audience. Word spread that the chief's useless son was making a spectacle of himself at the napping station. Warriors drifted over with smirks on their faces, expecting entertainment. I gave them something better. Watch the angle. I positioned the antler hammer against the obsidian core, visualizing the fracture pattern before I struck. One sharp blow. The flake sheared off exactly where I wanted it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I worked the edge with a bone pressure flaker, removing tiny chips that transformed a serviceable blade into something that could split a hair. 15 strikes total. The old napper, a weathered man named Orn, usually took 40 strikes to produce a rougher result. Impossible, someone breathed. I held up the finished blade. Firelight caught its edge thin, as paper sharp, as broken glass. Try it. A young warrior named Kreth snatched it from my hand. He drew it across a leather strip, and the material parted like water. Silence fell. Then Kreth looked at me with something I hadn't seen since arriving in this world. Respect. Teach me. 3 more warriors pushed forward. Then 5. The crowd pressed closer, and I saw hungry eyes everywhere. People who'd spent their lives accepting that tools could only be so sharp, that survival meant constant struggle against inadequate equipment. From the shadows at the cave mouth, Mogren watched. His lips moved in what might have been a curse. Or a prayer. Senna found me. After the evening meal, the tribe had retreated to sleeping piles, exhausted from a day of practicing my techniques. I sat alone by a dying fire, sketching weapon designs in the ash with a stick. You see things others don't. She crouched across from me, her ash-gray hair catching ember light. Ow! Vishun quest. The lie came easily now. Lies. She extended her scarred palms toward the coals, and they flared brighter without her adding fuel. I've spent 3 winters trying to make stone harder through heat. The shamans exiled me or we burn. The tribe erupted into chaos. Women wailed. Warriors shouted threats they couldn't back up. Chief Vornak pushed through the crowd, his scarred face unreadable, as he took the totem from the scouts' trembling hands. I did the math, while panic swirled around me. Thornback fighting strength, maybe 15 capable warriors. Bloodfang warband, 40 seasoned killers led by a brute with earth-sensing magic. Even if we fortified the cave, even if we caught them in an ambush, the numbers meant extinction. Unless I could change the weapons. I thought about everything I'd ever read about metallurgy. Copper smelting required temperatures around 1,100 degrees Celsius. Bronze needed tin alloys, both needed or deposits, charcoal production, ceramic crucibles, and time. Time I had, 3 weeks until the full moon. The rest I'd have to invent from memory. Senna. I grabbed her arm. How hot can your fires burn? Vornak's council fire crackled in the center of the main cave, throwing shadows across the faces of the tribe's elders. I stepped forward before my courage could fail. I received a vision. The words hung in the smoky air. Mogren's head snapped toward me, red ochre eyes narrowing to slits. The spirits showed me weapons. I continued, forcing my voice steady. Not obsidian, not bone, metal that flows like water and hardens like stone. Weapons that will break Bloodfang spears like dry twigs. Lies. Mogren rose from his crouch, finger bones rattling on his staff. This boy speaks demon words. The spirits have not touched him. I would know. You would know. Vornak's voice cut through the shaman's protest. You knew the mammoth herd would be safe hunting. 3 of my warriors are dead. Mogren's mouth worked silently. I pressed my advantage. Give me 3 weeks. Until the full moon. If I fail, send the tribute and my head with it. The chief's milky eye fixed on me for a long moment. His scarred face showed nothing. Then he lifted one gnarled hand. 3 weeks. Mogren's staff cracked against stone as he stormed from the cave. I didn't watch him go. I was already calculating the first step. The mountain path to Ash Walker territory wound through pine forest so dense that daylight became twilight within 100 paces. Senna moved ahead of me, her ash-gray hair almost invisible against the morning mist. The green rocks, she said without turning. The ash walkers call them spirit tears. They say the earth weeps them, and they use them for ornaments, beads. She ducked under a fallen trunk. Their shamans wear them during rituals. They believe the color holds earth magic. I followed her through a crevice that scraped my shoulders raw. My forearm still ached from yesterday's burn, the first failed furnace test. But I'd learned. River clay needed more sand. The bellows needed a longer pipe. They won't trade weapons to thornbacks, Senna added. I don't need weapons. I need rocks. She glanced back, confusion clear on her scarred face. I just smiled. The Ash Walker trading post sat in a natural bowl where 3 valleys met. Smoke rose from hide tents painted with geometric patterns. Their warriors wore copper beads in their braids, beautiful, useless copper that they'd never learned to forge. The trader who approached us had gray streaks in his hair and contempt in his eyes. His name was Grenik, and he looked at our 3 mammoth tusks like a man inspecting rotten meat. Thornbacks. He spat. What do you want? Malachite. I used the word Senna had taught me. The green spirit tears. A full basket. Grenik's eyebrows rose. Then he laughed, a harsh bark that brought 2 other ash walkers running. Pretty stones for weapons. He wheezed between cackles. Do thornbacks think green rocks will stop Bloodfang's spears? They're for ornaments, I said. Our women want pretty things. More laughter, but greed won over mockery. 3 mammoth tusks could buy a lot of meat through the winter. Greenock made the trade, still chuckling, as he handed over a woven basket heavy with green-veined stones. I memorized every tur of the path home. We need more ore, much more. The furnace took 2 days to rebuild properly. River clay mixed with sand, dried over Senna's sacred fire, then fired again until it could withstand the heat I needed. Bellows crafted from deer hide and hollow reeds. Charcoal piled high. Hotter, I told Sen on the 3rd night. Push it hotter. Her face gleamed with sweat as she worked the bellows. The malachite chunks in my stone crucible began to shift, to shimmer, to change. And then it happened. Liquid copper, glowing like captured sunset, pooled at the crucible's base. I tilted it carefully, heart pounding, and poured the molten metal into the blade mold-eyed carved from riverstone. The hiss of cooling metal was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. When it cooled enough to handle, I used a riverstone as a hammer. Each strike rang differently than bone or flint, a clear, metallic note that echoed through the night. The copper flattened, stretched, took shape under my hands. By dawn, I held a rough blade the length of my forearm. Its edge wasn't pretty, but when I drew it across a bone shield that had taken a warrior 3 days to craft, the blade sliced through like the bone was wet leather. The watching crowd went silent. Vornak pushed through the gathered thornbacks, his massive frame blocking the firelight. He took the copper blade from my hands without asking, his one good eye tracing the edge. Then he pressed it against his scarred palm and drew across. Blood welled immediately, bright red against copper-bright metal. For the first time since the mammoth attack killed 3 of his warriors, since the Bloodfang totem arrived promising death, since the weight of a dying tribe had bent his shoulders toward the earth, the old chief smiled. More, he said. Make more. But I wasn't watching him. I was watching Mogren's shadow slip between the tents at the cave's edge, disappearing into the dark forest with a speed that had nothing to do with an old man's legs. The shaman would never accept this revolution peacefully, and I had 17 days left until the Bloodfangs came to collect their answer. The first day of shield training, Proc dropped his wicker frame 3 times before we'd finished the opening stance. The hide-covered shields were heavier than hunting tools, awkward in hands built for throwing spears. But I drove them through the positions anyway. Lock arms, I shouted. Overlap edges. The man beside you is your wall. By sunset, we could hold a line for 8 seconds. By the 3rd morning, 60. An eternity in tribal combat, where fights devolved into scattered brawls within moments. 15 men breathing, as one moving, as one dying, as one if necessary. I watched Senna correct Hrok's grip on his spear, her ash-gray hair catching firelight. She learned faster than any of them. Her hands remembered patterns. After seeing them once, a gift that made her invaluable. The evening meal came, as always, carried by the youngest gatherers. Root stew with mammoth fat, the smell sharp in the cold air. Senna's hand caught my wrist before I lifted the bowl. The color's wrong. Her voice was barely a whisper. Night root makes broth darker at the edges. See, I looked. A slight purple tinge where the liquid touched clay. Mogren's specialty, according to the other fire tenders. 3 drops caused sleep. 10 caused death. We switched bowls without ceremony. The gatherer who'd served me ate heartily that night, none the wiser. I found Mogren watching from the shadows near the sacred cave, his ochre-rimmed eyes unreadable. I said nothing. Neither did he. But we both understood something had shifted. Internal enemies might kill me before Krata ever got the chance. Movement at the valley's edge. The scout's call came on the 9th morning. I grabbed the handgun from its hiding place beneath my sleeping furs and ran for the overlook. 30 figures, maybe more, moving through the pine forest with the arrogance of men who expected no resistance. Krata himself led them, his necklace of finger bones visible even at this distance. He'd tired of waiting for our tribute answer. 30 raiders to our 40 villagers, and his were all hardened killers. But I'd spent 9 days preparing for exactly this. Shield bearers to the narrow pass. I grabbed Rock's shoulder. Spear teams to the flanking positions. And nobody attacks until my thunder speaks first. They moved with the coordination we drilled. Not perfectly, but close enough. Fear made them faster. The narrow pass between the twin boulders was barely wide enough for 3 men to walk abreast. Krata's confidence was his weakness. He'd expect us to scatter at his war cry, to flee into the forest where his raiders could hunt us down individually. He expected prey. I intended to give him a wall. 15 shields locked into place. Behind them, spears waited with their new aerodynamic fletching. In my hand, cold metal hummed with potential. The Bloodfangs emerged from the treeline in a loose formation, Krata's lieutenant, a scarred monster named Grull, leading the charge. They hooped and screamed, weapons raised, absolute confidence in their momentum. I aimed. The handgun kicked. Grull's chest erupted. He dropped mid-stride, sliding across frozen earth, dead before he understood what killed him. For 3 heartbeats, nothing moved. Then the Bloodfangs charged anyway, because stopping was impossible, because their momentum carried them forward, because they couldn't process what had happened. They hit my shield wall like a wave against stone. The impact shook the line. Croc stumbled, but held. Arms locked. Shields overlapped. The raiders couldn't push through, couldn't flank, couldn't do anything, but press uselessly against an immovable barrier. Now, I roared. Javelins arced from the hidden spear teams, striking from angles the Bloodfangs couldn't defend. 3 raiders fell, then 4 more. Screams mixed with confusion, as weapons they'd never seen tore through their ranks. Krata saw his warband dying. He did what any warlord would do. He led from the front. The man was massive, 200 pounds of muscle and rage slamming into our center like a battering ram. His obsidian axe crushed Rock's shield, then crushed Rock's skull beneath it. Young Tarn went down next, his chest caved in by a single blow. The line buckled, and through the gap stepped Vornak. My father, the scarred chief, the man who'd blessed my revolution with blood on copper. Krata. His voice boomed across the battlefield. Face me, dog, or are Bloodfangs only brave against children? The warlord turned. His eyes found a man who'd ruled the Thornbacks for 30 years. A challenge from a chief demanded answer, tribal law older than memory. They clashed in the gap between broken shields. Vornak fought like a wounded bear, his old body remembering movements it had used decades ago. His copper knife opened Krata's arm. His elbow cracked against the warlord's jaw. But he was 60 winters old, and Krata was in his prime. The obsidian axe caught Vornak in the temple. A sound like wet wood splitting. My father's legs buckled, but his hands, those twisted oak branch hands, wrapped around Krata's throat and didn't let go. Even dying, even with his skull caved in, he held. 3 seconds. An eternity. I raised the handgun, sighted down the barrel, pulled the trigger. The shot took Krata through the spine. He jerked once, twice, then collapsed forward onto Vornak's ruined body. Arterial blood painted the frozen earth. The Bloodfang raiders, leaderless and broken, fled into the forest. I knelt beside the man who'd raised me in this body, who believed in thunder weapons and copper blades, who'd sacrificed everything so I could have 3 seconds. His one good, I was still open, still watching. More, he'd said just days ago. Make more. I closed his eye with shaking fingers. Victory. The word tasted like ash. We destroyed the Bloodfang threat, secured our survival, proven that 15 disciplined warriors could break 30 raiders. But the only man who truly believed in me was gone. And somewhere in the shadows, Mogren watched with patient, poisonous eyes, waiting for his next chance to end this revolution before the magical kingdoms ever learned it existed. 19 corpses lay scattered across the frozen earth, their blood already crystallizing in the dawn cold. My handgun was still warm against my palm. The survivors had fled east, screaming about thunder magic and demons who killed from distances no spear could reach. Let them run. Let them spread those stories to every tribe, every settlement, every kingdom scout who might be listening. I holstered the weapon and turned to face my tribe. Mogra moved first. The shaman stepped forward, ochre-painted face twisted into something meant to look sorrowful, but couldn't quite hide the calculation beneath. "The spirits have claimed Chief Vornak," he announced, his voice carrying across the blood-soaked clearing. "In this time of grief, the tribe needs guidance. Spiritual guidance." He spread his blackened fingers toward the gathered warriors. "I will perform the death rites. I will commune with the ancestors. I will know." The word came from Brendan. If this story has you hooked, Butterfly Stories on Patreon is where the next parts, exclusive continuations, and early releases are waiting. You can start with a free trial right now through the link below. All right, back to the story. Nick, the warrior who'd held the left flank when everything nearly collapsed. He dropped to one knee before me, fist pressed against his chest. "Durgan, Thorn's son, you led us. You armed us. You brought thunder where there was only silence." 11 more warriors knelt, the same men who'd stood in my shield wall, who'd fired their first shots into charging enemies, who'd watched my father die so I could live. Mogren's face went pale beneath the paint. "You may perform the death rites, shaman." I met his red-rimmed eyes and held them. "That is your domain. But this tribe follows me now." He bowed, deep and slow, every movement radiating hatred he couldn't afford to express. "As the warriors declare," he whispered. When he rose, his eyes promised murder. I filed that away for later. Senna found me an hour later, while I was cleaning my father's blood from my hands in the stream. She carried a clay tablet covered in scratched symbols. "The forging process," she said without preamble. "I've written it down. Everything. The ratios, the temperatures, the cooling methods." I stared at the tablet, at knowledge that should have been mine alone, now preserved in a form anyone could study. "I've already begun teaching Corvin and Mira." She watched my face carefully. "You told me we needed more weapons, more ammunition. One forge isn't enough." She was right. That was the problem. 3 apprentices by next moon, I said finally. "No more than that. And they report directly to you." She nodded, but I saw the understanding in her gray eyes. The military historian in me knew this moment too well. I just watched technology escape my control. The cat was out of the bag, the genie was out of the bottle, and every other cliché for "you can't put this back." Good. A revolution couldn't rest on one man's shoulders. The warrior acclamation happened at midday. No ritual combat, no bloodline claim. Just 12 men who'd survived hell together, raising their voices until the valley echoed. Tradition shattered that easily. I dispatched 3 traders within the hour. Their mission: find the Ash Walkers in their mountain strongholds and offer peace, alliance, and trade. Specifically, trade for tin or copper was good. Bronze would be revolutionary. That evening, I sat alone in my father's hut, now mine, and closed my eyes. The warehouse materialized in my mind's eye, a vast space of shelving, crates, and weapon racks stretching into shadow. Most sections remained locked, their contents visible, but unreachable behind shimmering barriers. Tier 1 had given me handguns, enough to establish dominance against tribal threats. Tier 2 showed rifles, shotguns, and, critically, the machinery and chemical compounds for ammunition production. The barrier flickered when I focused on it, responding to something. Population growth. Infrastructure development. The warehouse seemed to measure tribal progress through metrics I was only beginning to understand. Beyond that, Tier 3 held body armor and grenades. Tier 4 contained shapes that made my breath catch. Heavy weapons, explosive ordnance, things that could level fortifications and shatter armies. But the truly distant sections, locked behind barriers so thick they were nearly opaque, contained items I couldn't even identify. Future challenges would unlock future tools. I opened my eyes. My father's bone-tooth necklace hung around my neck now, heavy with meaning. "More," he'd said. "Make more." The ring of hammer on metal drew me outside at dusk. 3 forges burned where there had been one. Senna's apprentices worked the bellows, while she supervised, her ash-gray hair catching the firelight. I walked to the valley's edge and looked west, toward the mountains that separated our territory from the wider world. Smoke rose from the forges in plumes that would be visible for miles. Sounds that hadn't existed for thousands of years echoed through the valley. The clang of metal shaping, the hiss of hot copper meeting water, the organized shouts of workers following processes no tribe had ever known. Somewhere out there, beyond those peaks, lay kingdoms and cities with learned magic. Sorcerers who commanded elements. Armies numbered in thousands. Powers that viewed tribal lands as resources to exploit. They weren't ready for this. I gripped my father's necklace, feeling the weight of bone and tooth against my chest. The Thornbacks will never be prey again, I whispered to the frozen wind. The words felt true, but as I turned back toward the forges, I caught movement at the forest's edge. A figure in robes I'd never seen before. Silver-streaked black hair. Eyes that glowed faint violet in the gathering dark. She watched the smoke rising from my forges. Watched me watching her. Then she smiled, raised one elegant hand, and vanished in a flash of lightning that left afterimages burning across my vision. The magical kingdoms had already found us. Want to see what happens next? Continue this story on Butterfly Stories over on Patreon. Start your free trial to unlock the next episodes. Link in the description.